Good day and welcome to this session on urban foodscapes, how food changes people's social behaviour. In this session, we'll be talking about the relationship between consumption and the food system and some of the dynamics that shape that relationship. My name is Jane Battersby. I'm an associate professor at the African Centre for Cities at the University of Cape Town. Before we get into things, we need to ask some really fundamental questions. Firstly, what is food? And what does food do? Now, this may seem quite obvious, but different actors in the food system treat food as very different things. In some cases, food is seen as a basic necessity, something that needs to be provided to people in order to keep them alive, in order to keep them from rioting, etc. Others view food as a means of political control. Still others think about food primarily in terms of nutrition and the health benefits that come from particular kinds of foods. Business often treats food as a commodity. In South Africa, we have the right to food as a fundamental right. Food is a human right. Food is also a bearer of culture. Food is a bringer of livelihoods. And all of these things come together to shape what we consume and how we consume. So I guess the question is, why did you eat the last thing that you ate? Right now I'm looking at my desk and seeing the remnants of the last food that I ate. If you were to press me hard about why I'd consumed what I consumed, I probably wouldn't be able to give you the definitive, honest answer. In fact, most of us probably can't explain why we consume what we consume. And yet, business seems to know better than we do in many cases. In her book, The Hungry City, Carolyn Steele relates an interview with one of the largest ready meal retailers in the UK. And they say that on a drizzly day, they need to produce £400,000 worth extra of ready meals, because when the weather's a little bit bad, people go for the comfort food of a ready meal. And yet, if the weather turns worse and it turns rainy, they need to produce less because people stay in and raid the fridge. If you were speaking to an individual consumer, they probably wouldn't be able to tell you this pattern. And yet, when you take the aggregate patterns, the retailers know. When we work in Zambia, people will tell us that if they haven't had nshima, if they haven't had maize meal as this core part of their plate, they haven't eaten. This is the cultural diet. And yet that cultural diet is fundamentally shaped by years of agricultural policy, of global investment, of global trade patterns. The choices we make about food are not often opaque, are not often transparent. We need to know why we do what we do with food. Now, in preparation for this, we were given quite extensive notes on how to do a presentation. And one of the main notes was, don't have any slides that are full of text. So in light of that, here's a very extensive slide full of text from Wayne Roberts, who is one of the world's top food policy experts. And he's talking about how a city is what it eats. It says, more than any of our other biological needs, the choices we make around food affect the shape, the style, the pulse, smell, look, feel, health, economy, street light, and infrastructure of our cities. He goes on to provide a lot of detail. I'm not going to read the whole slide, but since this is recorded, you can pause it and really read the richness of this quote. I love this quote. Except that I don't, because I had questions about whether or not we really have that much agency to change the food systems that we operate in. And I think Roberts himself would acknowledge that case. So do we really hold that much power? When we work in lower income communities and we ask people why they consume what they consume, often it's about what's available, what's accessible. But when we ask the retailers, they will tell us it's about consumer demand. There's this dialectical relationship between the foodscape and the consumer. Both shape each other in their own particular ways, but there are other things going on. In this image, on the shelves, there were probably 15 different types and sizes of Instant Pup, highly sweetened, highly flavored, a product that hadn't been on the market 10 years ago. Why was that suddenly there? Why was that demand suddenly there? Why was that availability suddenly there? What are the wider processes that shape these foodscapes and consumers' actions within them? Because I think although there is this relationship between consumer and the food system, it's informed by these much wider processes of geography, of infrastructure, of economies, of regulation, of policy, each acting on the consumer, each acting on the food system, and each acting on the relationship between those two. And so when I look at research that we've done in neighborhoods in Cape Town, this is mapping work we did of informal vendors in Philippi. I see a number of things playing out in this relationship. I see the spazas dotted around the neighborhood, responding to consumer needs, selling in affordable unit sizes, offering credit, offering longer trading hours. I see a Fed cook seller opening up at 5 o'clock in the morning to meet the consumer's need as they commute to work. I see the weekend live chicken seller selling to a cultural demand for live chicken meat, the taste that's there. I see the concentration of retail around the train station in the bottom of the map, again responding to that kind of transport dynamic that we have, that limited time that people have at the end of the day to cook and prepare food. I see a system that is uniquely designed to respond to consumer needs. And yet I also see the limitations of that. I see the spazas with security grills afraid of crime and xenophobic violence. I see a dearth of healthy meals being sold, partly as a result of poor sanitation provision. And so we see consumer choice and the food system being shaped by multiple multidimensional poverty and infrastructure challenges, challenges of inadequate income, inadequate energy, limited storage, limited time. And those factors both shape the consumer practice, but also the characteristics of the retail environment themselves. I see food as oftentimes people's only discretionary income. And so when times are hard, the one area that people cut back on is their food expenditure. And yet when times are a little more plentiful, food is the way in which you provide a treat. Food is the way in which you provide succor and comfort to yourself. I see the desire for culturally appropriate foods, and yet also I see food as this plug for structural deficiencies. For example, if you look at the woefully underfunded education system, the school tuck shop is often used as a way to generate additional income for the school. So food then becomes this mechanism to address a structural deficiency. And so this relationship between food and the consumer and the food environment is complex, it's dynamic, and it's shaped by a number of external factors. So the question is, how much agency do people have in the system? So I'm drawing near to a close. We think about the kind of now obligatory COVID reflection. What has COVID shown us about this relationship between social practice and the food system? I think the first thing it's shown us is that food is more than just food. If you think about the kind of explosion of sourdough across the city over the last few months, why is it that so many people have turned to baking? There's something about the process of cooking, process of baking, the alchemy of bread that grounds us, that sustains us, that connects us in a different way to the environment. There's something about the producing of food for other people. There's an expression of nurturing, an expression of care. So food is more than just the kind of the commodity value of the food or the nutritional outcome of consuming the food. Food is about much more than that. We've seen food become this expression of values. Many people are trying not to shop at the big retailers, partly out of fear of COVID, but partly because people want to invest where their values are, investing in the small scale, investing in the local. And the food system is one of those obvious places in which that happens. So food has become this expression of values. Food has also become this expression of solidarity. In the wake of the COVID crisis, the main civil society response has not been around income support. It's been around food parcels, around money for food vouchers, around support for community kitchens. The cans have connected across space, often through food. Food has been this expression of solidarity, but perhaps of safe solidarity, because people are far less willing to provide cash. There's something more morally safe about providing food. And I think the final thing is that food has demonstrated how deeply unequal our food system is. And the sectors of the food system that have always been robust have become more robust. And those that have always been precarious have become more precarious. So in closing, I think the question is, what has the current system rendered visible about our relationships to food, to each other, and to the food systems we occupy? I think some of us have had this moment of richness, and some of us have had this moment of fear that's been manifest through food. How do we frame our power in the system going forward? here endeth the lesson.